Springfield, Massachusetts, October 15th, 1987. The autumn leaves had just begun their vibrant transformation when William Thompson vanished without a trace from the heart of Springfield, Massachusetts. At precisely 6:47 p.m. on that crisp Thursday evening, the renowned sundial designer and astronomy professor at the University of Massachusetts locked his downtown workshop for what would be the final time. Security cameras from a neighboring business captured his silhouette as he walked toward the parking area. But William Thompson would never reach his car. Thompson had spent the better part of 3 decades crafting intricate sundials for universities, private collectors, and historical societies across New England. His reputation for astronomical precision and historical accuracy had earned him recognition as one of the foremost experts in his field. Colleagues knew him as a meticulous craftsman who could calculate shadow angles with mathematical perfection and recreate timepieces that had graced ancient civilizations. "So glad to have you here. Comment your city so I can bring cases from your region and also know where you're watching me from." The first sign that something was amiss came when Elizabeth Thompson called the Springfield Police Department at 11:30 p.m. Her husband had never failed to return home for dinner without calling, and his absence grew more concerning as the hours passed. Elizabeth described William as a creature of habit, someone who maintained rigid schedules both in his academic life and personal routine. Detective Michael Rodriguez responded to the initial missing person report and immediately recognized the unusual circumstances surrounding Thompson's disappearance. The workshop remained locked from the outside, but when police gained entry, they discovered clear signs of an abrupt departure. Tools lay scattered across the workbench, metal shavings covered the floor, and most tellingly, an intricate sundial project sat half-completed on the main table. The unfinished piece appeared to be unlike anything Thompson had previously crafted. Instead of the traditional garden sundials or educational models he typically produced, this project incorporated complex astronomical calculations and unusual bronze alloy materials. The design featured multiple shadow casting elements and measurement scales that suggested a level of sophistication far beyond conventional timepieces. Elizabeth Thompson provided investigators with crucial details about her husband's recent behavior. For approximately 6 weeks prior to his disappearance, William had been working extended hours at his workshop, often returning home well past midnight. He had mentioned receiving a significant commission from a private collector, though he remained unusually secretive about the project's specifics and the client's identity. Bank records revealed that Thompson had received 3 substantial payments totaling $15,000 in the months leading up to his disappearance. The deposits came from a company called Heritage Timepiece Acquisitions, which further investigation would later reveal had no legitimate business address or corporate registration in Massachusetts. The workshop itself yielded additional mysteries. Hidden beneath a loose floorboard, investigators discovered detailed sketches of historical sundials from various European museums, along with astronomical charts and mathematical calculations written in Thompson's distinctive handwriting. The papers suggested he had been researching specific timepieces from the medieval period, particularly those allegedly lost or destroyed during World War II. Professor Daniel Martinez from the University of Massachusetts Astronomy Department provided insight into Thompson's recent academic activities. Martinez reported that his colleague had been requesting access to historical archives and astronomical databases with increasing frequency. Thompson had shown particular interest in verifying the authenticity of certain antique timepieces and had expressed concerns about discrepancies he had discovered in several museum collections. The investigation expanded when police learned that Thompson had contacted multiple insurance companies in the weeks before his disappearance, inquiring about coverage for high-value antique items. He had also made inquiries with several auction houses regarding the process of authenticating historical artifacts and the potential market value of rare sundials. As Detective Rodriguez delved deeper into Thompson's recent activities, a pattern began to emerge that suggested the missing professor had stumbled upon something far more significant than a simple restoration project. Phone records showed calls to the FBI's Art Crime Team division, though no formal reports had been filed. Thompson had also reached out to several European museums, requesting detailed photographs and provenance documentation for pieces in their collections. The physical evidence from the workshop painted a picture of someone who had left in considerable haste. Coffee remained in Thompson's mug, still warm when police arrived. His jacket hung on its usual hook, and his car keys were found on the workbench beside the unfinished sundial. Most concerning was the discovery of what appeared to be a struggle near the workshop's rear entrance, where investigators found disturbed gravel and signs that something heavy had been dragged across the ground. Elizabeth Thompson's final conversation with her husband took on new significance as the investigation progressed. William had mentioned being close to completing something that would change everything, though he had refused to elaborate when pressed for details. He had also expressed concerns about certain individuals who had been pressuring him to complete his work ahead of schedule. The Springfield Police Department officially classified William Thompson's case as a missing person investigation, but the evidence increasingly suggested something more sinister. The combination of substantial unexplained payments, secretive behavior, and signs of a hasty departure pointed toward circumstances that went far beyond a simple disappearance. As the first week of investigation concluded, Detective Rodriguez found himself confronting a case that seemed to involve elements of art fraud, historical artifacts, and potentially dangerous individuals willing to go to extreme lengths to protect their interests. The unfinished sundial on Thompson's workbench would prove to be just the beginning of a mystery that would remain unsolved for more than 3 decades. The investigation was about to reveal connections to a world where the line between authentic historical artifacts and sophisticated forgeries had become dangerously blurred, and where William Thompson's expertise in astronomical calculations had made him both invaluable and expendable to the wrong people. Springfield, Massachusetts, October 1987. The first 3 weeks of the investigation into William Thompson's disappearance revealed a complex web of academic research and suspicious financial transactions that painted an increasingly troubling picture. Detective Michael Rodriguez found himself navigating through layers of scholarly correspondence and technical documentation that suggested Thompson had been involved in something far more significant than anyone had initially realized. University records from the Massachusetts campus provided crucial insights into Thompson's activities during the months preceding his disappearance. Professor Daniel Martinez revealed that his colleague had been requesting access to specialized astronomical databases and historical archives with unprecedented frequency. Thompson had specifically focused on mathematical calculations related to shadow projection and solar positioning, requesting documents that dated back to medieval European monasteries and Renaissance-era scientific institutions. The astronomy department's library records showed that Thompson had checked out numerous texts on historical timekeeping methods, particularly focusing on the mathematical principles used by ancient civilizations to create accurate sundials. Most intriguing was his research into the work of specific historical figures, including medieval monks who had crafted timepieces for European monasteries and Renaissance astronomers who had developed advanced shadow casting techniques. Elizabeth Thompson provided investigators with additional details about her husband's increasingly secretive behavior. During their final weeks together, William had transformed their home study into a makeshift research center, covering the walls with photocopied pages from historical manuscripts and astronomical charts. He had been working late into the night, often emerging from his study with expressions of both excitement and deep concern. The financial investigation took a significant turn when bank records revealed the full extent of Thompson's recent transactions. Beyond the $15,000 from heritage timepiece acquisitions, investigators discovered that Thompson had made several large purchases of specialized materials, including rare bronze alloys and precision-crafted measurement tools. He had also invested in high-end photography equipment and document analysis software, suggesting he was conducting detailed examinations of historical artifacts. A breakthrough came when investigators located Thompson's safety deposit box at Springfield First National Bank. The box contained photographs of various sundials from European museums, along with detailed technical drawings and mathematical calculations. Most significantly, the box held copies of correspondence between Thompson and several prominent art dealers and auction houses, discussing the authentication of historical timepieces and the potential market value of rare astronomical instruments. The correspondence revealed that Thompson had been contacted by multiple parties seeking his expertise in verifying the authenticity of sundials claimed to be medieval or Renaissance-era pieces. Several of these inquiries had come from private collectors who possessed timepieces with questionable provenance, particularly items that had allegedly surfaced in the art market following World War II. Professor Martinez provided crucial context about Thompson's growing concerns regarding certain pieces in museum collections. Thompson had privately expressed doubts about several high-profile sundials displayed in prestigious institutions, suggesting that mathematical inconsistencies in their construction indicated they were modern forgeries rather than authentic historical artifacts. He had been developing a systematic method for detecting these discrepancies through astronomical calculations and metallurgical analysis. The investigation revealed that Thompson had been corresponding with European museums, requesting detailed documentation about the provenance of specific timepieces in their collections. Several institutions had responded with photographs and historical records, but others had been notably reluctant to provide information or had claimed that certain documentation had been lost or destroyed during wartime. Phone records from Thompson's workshop showed numerous calls to law enforcement agencies, including the FBI's Art Crime Team and Interpol's Cultural Property Division. While no formal reports had been filed, the frequency and duration of these calls suggested that Thompson had been seeking guidance about reporting suspected art fraud. His final phone call to federal authorities had been placed just 2 days before his disappearance. The workshop investigation yielded additional evidence when crime scene technicians discovered hidden compartments built into Thompson's workbench. These spaces contained detailed chemical analysis reports on bronze and brass samples, suggesting that Thompson had been testing the age and composition of materials from various sundials. The results consistently showed that several supposedly ancient pieces were actually crafted using modern techniques and materials. Elizabeth Thompson revealed that her husband had been receiving pressure from unknown individuals to complete his current project ahead of schedule. William had mentioned receiving phone calls from people claiming to represent heritage timepiece acquisitions, though he had expressed growing suspicion about their true identity and motivations. He had confided that the pressure was becoming intense and that he was considering contacting federal authorities. The investigation expanded when Detective Rodriguez discovered that Heritage Timepiece Acquisitions was one of several shell companies that had been created specifically to conduct business with Thompson. Financial records showed a complex network of transactions involving multiple businesses, all of which appeared to be connected to the high-end antique and art market. None of these companies had legitimate business addresses or verifiable corporate structures. A significant development occurred when investigators learned that Thompson had been planning to present his findings at an upcoming academic conference on historical astronomy. His proposed presentation was titled Mathematical Authentication of Historical Timepieces, and would have detailed his methods for detecting forgeries through astronomical calculations. The conference organizers confirmed that Thompson's research had the potential to expose widespread fraud in the antique sundial market. The technical analysis of Thompson's unfinished workshop project revealed its true significance. The complex astronomical calculations and precision measurements suggested that he had been creating a master reference piece that could serve as a standard for authenticating historical sundials. The project incorporated mathematical principles that would have made it virtually impossible to create convincing forgeries without detection. As the investigation progressed, it became clear that Thompson's expertise had made him a significant threat to individuals involved in the fraudulent sale of fake historical artifacts. His developing authentication methods had the potential to expose forgeries worth millions of dollars and implicate respected dealers, collectors, and possibly even museum curators in fraudulent activities. The evidence suggested that Thompson had unknowingly become entangled with a sophisticated network of art forgers and dealers who specialized in creating and selling fake historical artifacts. His mathematical precision and astronomical expertise had initially made him valuable to these individuals, but his growing suspicions and planned academic presentation had transformed him from an asset into a dangerous liability. The investigation was about to uncover connections to an international network of art fraud that had been operating for decades, using respected academic experts like Thompson to legitimize forgeries before ultimately silencing those who threatened to expose the truth. Springfield, Massachusetts, November 1987. The investigation into William Thompson's disappearance took a dramatic turn when federal authorities intervened, revealing that the missing professor had unknowingly become entangled in one of the most sophisticated art fraud operations in American history. FBI Special Agent Robert Chen arrived in Springfield with a team of specialists from the Bureau's art crime team, bringing with them evidence that would transform the local missing person case into a federal investigation with international implications. Agent Chen's initial briefing to Detective Rodriguez revealed that the FBI had been monitoring heritage timepiece acquisitions and its associated shell companies for over 18 months as part of a broader investigation into fraudulent historical artifacts. The Bureau had identified a network of individuals who specialized in creating and selling fake antique timepieces, astronomical instruments, and other scientific artifacts to unsuspecting collectors and institutions. The federal investigation had originally focused on suspicious auction sales and insurance claims involving supposedly historical items that had surfaced in the American art market following World War II. Many of these pieces claimed provenance from European collections that had been displaced during the conflict, making their authenticity difficult to verify through traditional means. Thompson's expertise in astronomical calculations and historical craftsmanship had made him an unwitting participant in legitimizing these forgeries. Documents seized from a related investigation in Boston revealed the true scope of the operation. The network had been systematically targeting academic experts like Thompson, commissioning them to create detailed analyses and authentication reports for pieces that were actually sophisticated modern forgeries. These expert opinions were then used to establish provenance and increase the market value of fraudulent items before they were sold to museums, private collectors, and insurance companies. The FBI's investigation uncovered correspondence between Thompson and several European institutions that painted a disturbing picture of his growing awareness of the fraud. Thompson had been requesting original documentation from museums in Germany, France, and Italy, seeking to verify the historical accuracy of timepieces that had supposedly originated from these collections. His inquiries had revealed significant discrepancies in the historical records and raised questions about the authenticity of numerous high-profile pieces. Professor Daniel Martinez provided federal investigators with crucial information about Thompson's research methodology. Thompson had developed a revolutionary approach to authentication that combined astronomical calculations with metallurgical analysis and historical documentation. His method could detect forgeries by identifying mathematical errors in shadow calculations that would have been impossible for historical craftsmen to make, given the astronomical knowledge available during their respective time periods. The breakthrough in Thompson's authentication method had come through his analysis of sundials supposedly created by medieval European monasteries. Thompson had discovered that several prestigious pieces contained mathematical calculations based on astronomical data that had not been available to craftsmen during the medieval period. These anachronistic elements proved that the pieces were modern creations designed to deceive buyers and experts. Federal investigators revealed that Thompson's authentication work had identified forgeries worth approximately $12 million in current market value. The pieces had been sold to prominent museums, private collectors, and insurance companies over a period of 15 years. Thompson's research threatened to expose not only the forgers, but also dealers, auction houses, and possibly museum curators who had participated in the fraudulent sales, either knowingly or through negligent authentication practices. The investigation expanded to include several prominent figures in the New England art and antique community. Anthony Peterson, owner of Heritage Fine Arts Gallery in Boston, emerged as a central figure in the network. Peterson had been instrumental in placing fraudulent pieces with major collectors and had cultivated relationships with museum curators and insurance appraisers who could facilitate the authentication and sale of questionable items. Phone records revealed that Peterson had been in regular contact with Thompson during the weeks preceding his disappearance. The conversations had initially focused on Thompson's authentication work, but had become increasingly frequent and urgent as Thompson began expressing doubts about the pieces he was examining. Peterson had apparently been pressuring Thompson to complete his current project and provide authentication reports for several additional pieces. The FBI's investigation uncovered a sophisticated operation that extended far beyond simple forgery. The network had established relationships with legitimate businesses, including insurance companies, auction houses, and even some museum acquisition departments. They had created an entire ecosystem of fraudulent documentation, including fake historical records, forged expert opinions, and manufactured provenance stories that could withstand casual scrutiny. Thompson's workshop analysis revealed the full extent of his authentication research. Hidden within his files, investigators found detailed reports on over 30 sundials and astronomical instruments that he had determined to be forgeries. His research had identified specific mathematical errors, metallurgical inconsistencies, and historical anachronisms that proved these pieces were modern creations rather than authentic historical artifacts. The technical sophistication of the forgeries surprised even federal investigators. The network had employed skilled craftsmen who could recreate historical techniques and materials with remarkable accuracy. However, they had made subtle errors in astronomical calculations that only an expert like Thompson could detect. These mathematical mistakes had become the key to unraveling the entire operation. Agent Chen revealed that Thompson had contacted federal authorities just days before his disappearance, expressing concerns about being pressured to authenticate pieces that he believed were forgeries. Thompson had indicated that he was being threatened with legal action and professional destruction if he refused to provide favorable authentication reports. He had requested federal protection and had been scheduled to meet with FBI investigators on the day after his disappearance. The investigation uncovered evidence that the fraud network had been operating for over 2 decades, with connections to similar operations in Europe and other parts of the United States. The total value of fraudulent pieces they had successfully placed in the market was estimated to exceed $50 million. Thompson's authentication method threatened to expose the entire network and potentially invalidate insurance policies and museum acquisitions worth tens of millions of dollars. As federal investigators delved deeper into the case, they discovered that Thompson's disappearance was not an isolated incident. Several other experts in historical artifacts had experienced similar pressure from unknown individuals seeking authentication services. 2 European scholars who had expressed doubts about certain pieces had suffered suspicious accidents, and a prominent German horologist had withdrawn from authentication work after receiving anonymous threats. The evidence suggested that Thompson had not simply disappeared, but had been specifically targeted because his expertise posed an existential threat to a criminal enterprise that had operated successfully for decades. His mathematical precision and growing suspicions had made him too dangerous to allow him to continue his research or present his findings to the academic community. The investigation was about to reveal that Thompson's fate was connected to a ruthless organization willing to eliminate anyone who threatened their profitable fraud operation, and that his disappearance was part of a pattern of intimidation and violence designed to protect millions of dollars in fraudulent art sales. Boston, Massachusetts, March 2023. 36 years after William Thompson's disappearance, a remarkable discovery would finally unlock the secrets that had remained buried since 1987. Charles Wilson, a retired master horologist who had spent 5 decades restoring antique timepieces, stumbled upon mathematical inconsistencies that would prove to be the key to solving one of New England's most enduring mysteries. Wilson had established his reputation through meticulous restoration work on historical clocks and astronomical instruments for museums and private collectors throughout the Northeast. His workshop in Boston's historic district had become a destination for institutions seeking expert analysis of questionable timepieces. It was during a routine authentication request that Wilson first encountered the mathematical anomalies that would change everything. The piece in question was a supposedly 16th-century sundial that had been offered to the Museum of Science in Boston by a private collector. The collector claimed the timepiece had been crafted by a renowned German astronomer and had surfaced in the art market following the dissolution of a European estate. The museum's curators had requested Wilson's opinion before proceeding with the acquisition, given the piece's substantial asking price of $250,000. Wilson's initial examination using modern astronomical software revealed mathematical errors that would have been impossible for a 16th-century craftsman to make. The shadow calculations were based on astronomical data that had not been available until the development of advanced telescopes and mathematical principles that were not understood until centuries after the piece's alleged creation date. Intrigued by these discoveries, Wilson began investigating other supposedly historical timepieces he had encountered throughout his career. Using advanced computer modeling and astronomical databases that had not existed in the 1980s, he systematically analyzed dozens of pieces that had passed through prominent auction houses and museum acquisitions over the previous decades. The results were shocking. Wilson identified a consistent pattern of mathematical errors across multiple pieces that suggested they were all products of the same sophisticated forgery operation. The errors were subtle enough to escape detection by traditional authentication methods, but were glaringly obvious when subjected to precise astronomical calculations using modern computational tools. Wilson's investigation revealed that the forgers had made systematic mistakes in calculating shadow angles and seasonal variations that would have been impossible for historical craftsmen who possessed accurate astronomical knowledge for their respective time periods. These errors created a mathematical fingerprint that could identify forgeries with scientific precision. The breakthrough came when Wilson discovered documentation about William Thompson's disappearance in archived newspaper reports from 1987. The description of Thompson's research methodology and his focus on mathematical authentication of historical timepieces bore striking similarities to Wilson's own discoveries. Wilson realized that Thompson had likely identified the same forgery network decades earlier, using similar analytical techniques with the computational tools available at that time. Wilson contacted the Springfield Police Department and was eventually connected with Detective Rodriguez, who had retired but remained interested in the Thompson case. Rodriguez provided Wilson with copies of Thompson's research notes and workshop documentation that had been preserved in the case files. The mathematical calculations and analytical methods Thompson had developed were remarkably similar to Wilson's own approach, confirming that Thompson had indeed discovered the forgery network. The comparison of Thompson's 1987 research with Wilson's 2023 analysis revealed the full scope of the fraud operation. Thompson had identified approximately 30 fraudulent pieces, while Wilson's expanded investigation using modern technology had uncovered over 120 suspicious timepieces that bore the same mathematical fingerprint. Wilson's analysis demonstrated that the forgery network had been extraordinarily successful in placing fraudulent pieces with major institutions. The Metropolitan Museum of Art, the Smithsonian Institution, and dozens of smaller museums had unknowingly acquired forged timepieces worth millions of dollars. Private collectors and insurance companies had also been victimized by the sophisticated operation. The mathematical evidence was overwhelming. Wilson had developed computer models that could precisely calculate shadow patterns for any geographic location and historical time period. When these calculations were applied to the supposedly historical pieces, they revealed anachronistic errors that proved the timepieces were modern creations designed to deceive experts and collectors. Wilson's investigation uncovered evidence that the forgery network had continued operating long after Thompson's disappearance. New pieces bearing the same mathematical fingerprint had appeared in the art market throughout the 1990s and 2000s, suggesting that Thompson's elimination had allowed the operation to continue unimpeded for decades. The retired horologist compiled a comprehensive report documenting his findings and submitted it to the FBI's art crime team. Federal investigators immediately recognized the significance of Wilson's research and its connection to the Thompson case. The mathematical evidence provided definitive proof of fraud that could withstand legal scrutiny and potentially invalidate millions of dollars in fraudulent sales. Agent Robert Chen, who had worked the original Thompson investigation, confirmed that Wilson's findings corroborated the federal investigation from 1987. The mathematical fingerprint Wilson had identified matched the analytical approach Thompson had been developing before his disappearance. The evidence strongly suggested that Thompson had been eliminated because his research threatened to expose the entire forgery network. Wilson's investigation revealed that several prominent figures in the art and antique community had been involved in selling the fraudulent pieces. Anthony Peterson's Heritage Fine Arts Gallery had been a central distribution point for forged timepieces, but the network extended to other dealers, auction houses, and appraisers who had facilitated the fraudulent sales. The computer analysis also revealed that the forgers had become more sophisticated over time, correcting some of the mathematical errors that Thompson had initially identified. However, they had introduced new mistakes that Wilson's advanced computational methods could detect. This evolution in the forgery techniques provided a timeline that helped investigators understand how the operation had developed over the decades. Wilson's research demonstrated that the total value of fraudulent timepieces that had been successfully sold was far greater than federal investigators had originally estimated. The network had generated over $100 million in fraudulent sales over nearly 4 decades, making it one of the most successful art fraud operations in American history. The mathematical evidence also provided investigators with a powerful tool for identifying additional victims and recovering fraudulent pieces. Wilson's analytical methods could definitively prove that specific timepieces were forgeries, providing the legal foundation needed to pursue criminal charges and civil remedies. As Wilson prepared to present his findings to federal prosecutors, he discovered additional evidence that suggested the forgery network had been responsible for more than just art fraud. The sophisticated operation and willingness to eliminate threats like Thompson indicated an organization capable of extreme violence to protect their profitable criminal enterprise. The investigation was about to enter its final phase as federal authorities prepared to use Wilson's mathematical evidence to dismantle a criminal network that had operated with impunity for nearly 4 decades and finally bring justice for William Thompson's disappearance. Boston, Massachusetts, September 2023. The mathematical evidence compiled by Charles Wilson provided federal investigators with the breakthrough they needed to finally solve William Thompson's disappearance after 36 years. FBI Special Agent Jennifer Martinez, who had taken over the reopened case, coordinated a multi-state operation that would ultimately expose one of the most sophisticated art fraud networks in American criminal history and reveal the dark truth about Thompson's fate. The investigation's renewed focus on Anthony Peterson and his Heritage Fine Arts Gallery in Boston's prestigious Back Bay district revealed a criminal enterprise that had operated with remarkable sophistication for nearly 4 decades. Peterson, now 78 years old, had built his reputation as a respected dealer in historical artifacts and maintained relationships with prominent collectors, museum curators, and insurance appraisers throughout New England. Federal surveillance of Peterson's gallery and personal residence uncovered a complex network of associates who had facilitated the forgery operation. James Mitchell, a master craftsman who specialized in recreating historical metalworking techniques, had been creating the sophisticated forgeries that bore the mathematical fingerprint Wilson had identified. Mitchell's workshop in a converted warehouse outside Boston contained equipment capable of artificially aging metals and creating convincing replicas of historical artifacts. The investigation revealed that Peterson had been systematically targeting academic experts like Thompson since the early 1980s. The network identified scholars with specialized knowledge in authentication and historical analysis, then gradually drew them into providing expert opinions on supposedly legitimate pieces. When experts became suspicious or threatened to expose the operation, Peterson and his associates employed increasingly aggressive tactics to silence them. Wilson's mathematical analysis had provided investigators with a roadmap to trace the network's activities over 4 decades. The computer models could identify specific pieces that bore the forgery fingerprint and track their movement through auction houses, galleries, and private sales. This evidence revealed that Peterson's operation had successfully placed fraudulent artifacts worth over $150 million in museums and private collections. The breakthrough in locating Thompson came through analysis of Peterson's business records and property holdings. Federal investigators discovered that Peterson had owned a warehouse facility in rural Massachusetts that had been used for storage and manufacturing purposes since the 1980s. The property had been carefully hidden through a series of shell companies and trust arrangements that had prevented its discovery during the original investigation. Ground-penetrating radar surveys of the warehouse property revealed anomalies consistent with buried remains in an area that had been concrete-covered shortly after Thompson's disappearance in 1987. Excavation of the site under careful forensic supervision uncovered human remains that dental records would later confirm belonged to William Thompson. The forensic examination revealed that Thompson had been the victim of fatal trauma, though the exact circumstances of his death could not be determined due to the condition of the remains after 36 years. However, the location of the burial site and evidence found at the scene strongly suggested that Thompson had been brought to the warehouse facility and killed there before being buried in an attempt to permanently hide evidence of the crime. Documents recovered from Peterson's personal safe provided crucial evidence about the circumstances surrounding Thompson's murder. Handwritten notes detailed Peterson's growing concern about Thompson's authentication research and his plans to expose the forgery network to federal authorities. The notes revealed that Peterson had viewed Thompson's elimination as necessary to protect the profitable criminal enterprise. The investigation uncovered evidence that Thompson's murder had been carefully planned and executed by multiple members of the forgery network. Peterson had coordinated with Mitchell and at least 2 other associates to lure Thompson to the warehouse facility under the pretense of examining additional artifacts for authentication. Once Thompson arrived, he had been confronted about his research and ultimately killed when he refused to abandon his plans to expose the operation. Federal investigators discovered that the murder had been motivated not only by Thompson's threat to expose the forgery network, but also by his potential value as a witness in federal prosecutions. Thompson's research had identified specific individuals involved in the fraud, including Peterson, Mitchell, and several prominent dealers and appraisers who had knowingly participated in selling fraudulent artifacts. The evidence revealed that Peterson's network had continued operating for decades after Thompson's murder, becoming increasingly sophisticated in their forgery techniques and expanding their operations to include other types of historical artifacts beyond timepieces. The criminal enterprise had generated enormous profits while successfully avoiding detection by law enforcement and academic experts. Wilson's mathematical analysis had also revealed that the network had learned from Thompson's research and had attempted to correct some of the astronomical errors he had identified. However, they had introduced new mathematical mistakes that Wilson's advanced computational methods could detect, providing ironclad evidence of ongoing fraud that spanned multiple decades. The investigation uncovered evidence that Peterson and his associates had been responsible for intimidating other experts who had expressed doubts about pieces in their inventory. Several scholars had received anonymous threats, and at least 2 European researchers had withdrawn from authentication work after experiencing suspicious incidents that investigators now believed were connected to Peterson's network. Federal prosecutors prepared a comprehensive case against Peterson and his associates that included charges of murder, racketeering, art fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy. The evidence compiled by Wilson, combined with the forensic discoveries and documentary evidence, provided prosecutors with an overwhelming case that could result in life sentences for the primary defendants. The scope of the fraud operation shocked even experienced federal investigators. Peterson's network had successfully deceived some of the most prestigious cultural institutions in the world, including major museums that had unknowingly displayed fraudulent artifacts for decades. The total value of fraudulent pieces that would need to be identified and potentially returned to victims was estimated to exceed $200 million. As federal agents prepared to execute arrest warrants for Peterson and his known associates, they discovered that the elderly art dealer had been monitoring news reports about the reopened Thompson investigation. Electronic surveillance revealed that Peterson had been making preparations to flee the country, suggesting that he understood the mathematical evidence would ultimately expose his decades-long criminal operation. The investigation was entering its final phase as federal authorities prepared to arrest the individuals responsible for William Thompson's murder and dismantle a criminal network that had operated with impunity for nearly 4 decades, forever changing the landscape of art authentication and historical artifact collecting. Federal Courthouse, Boston, March 2024. The conclusion of one of the longest-running art fraud investigations in American history brought justice for William Thompson's family and exposed the full extent of a criminal network that had operated with devastating effect for nearly 4 decades. The coordinated arrests of Anthony Peterson and his associates marked the end of a sophisticated operation that had defrauded museums, collectors, and insurance companies of hundreds of millions of dollars, while claiming the life of a dedicated academic who had threatened to expose their crimes. Anthony Peterson's arrest at his Beacon Hill mansion occurred without incident, though investigators discovered that the elderly art dealer had been preparing to flee to a non-extradition country. Federal agents found packed luggage, false identification documents, and over $2 million in cash and precious metals that Peterson had apparently intended to use to establish a new identity abroad. The discovery reinforced prosecutors' arguments that Peterson was aware his criminal enterprise was finally facing exposure. James Mitchell, the master craftsman responsible for creating the sophisticated forgeries, was arrested at his warehouse workshop where federal agents discovered an extensive operation for manufacturing fake historical artifacts. The facility contained specialized equipment for artificially aging metals, recreating historical manufacturing techniques, and producing convincing documentation to support fraudulent provenance claims. Mitchell's detailed records provided investigators with evidence of over 300 fraudulent pieces produced over a 20-year period. The federal prosecution team, led by Assistant U.S. Attorney Sarah Williams, presented a comprehensive case that demonstrated the scope and sophistication of the criminal enterprise. The mathematical evidence compiled by Charles Wilson proved conclusively that dozens of pieces in major museum collections were sophisticated forgeries. Wilson's testimony provided the scientific foundation for proving fraud that could withstand the scrutiny of defense experts and appellate review. Peterson's trial revealed the calculated nature of William Thompson's murder and the extensive planning that had gone into silencing the professor before he could expose the forgery network. Documentary evidence showed that Peterson had been monitoring Thompson's research for months and had become increasingly concerned about the professor's growing suspicions regarding the authenticity of pieces he had been asked to authenticate. The prosecution demonstrated that Thompson's elimination had been motivated by both immediate financial concerns and long-term strategic considerations. Thompson's planned academic presentation would have exposed forgeries worth millions of dollars and implicated respected dealers and institutions in fraudulent transactions. His research methodology threatened to invalidate decades of successful fraud and potentially trigger criminal investigations across multiple jurisdictions. Evidence presented during the trial revealed that the forgery network had generated profits exceeding $200 million over nearly 4 decades of operation. Peterson had used these proceeds to maintain an elaborate lifestyle while systematically corrupting the authentication process for historical artifacts. The network had cultivated relationships with museum curators, insurance appraisers, and academic experts who had unknowingly provided legitimacy to fraudulent pieces. The impact of the fraud extended far beyond financial losses. Prestigious institutions, including the Metropolitan Museum of Art, the Smithsonian Institution, and numerous smaller museums, discovered that their collections contained fraudulent pieces that had been prominently displayed for decades. The authentication crisis forced these institutions to reevaluate their acquisition practices and implement new verification procedures for historical artifacts. Charles Wilson's mathematical authentication methods became the new standard for verifying historical timepieces and astronomical instruments. His computer-based analysis techniques provided scientific precision that traditional authentication methods could not match. Wilson's methodology was adopted by major auction houses, insurance companies, and cultural institutions seeking to prevent future fraud. The trial proceedings revealed additional victims beyond those who had purchased fraudulent artifacts. Several scholars and authentication experts had been intimidated, threatened, or otherwise pressured by Peterson's network when their research threatened to expose specific forgeries. The systematic targeting of academic experts had created a climate of fear that had prevented legitimate research into questionable pieces for decades. Peterson's conviction on charges including murder, racketeering, art fraud, and money laundering resulted in a life sentence without possibility of parole. At 79 years old, Peterson would spend his remaining years in federal prison, finally facing consequences for crimes that had spanned nearly 4 decades. The elderly art dealer showed no remorse during sentencing, maintaining his innocence despite overwhelming evidence of his guilt. James Mitchell received a sentence of 25 years in federal prison after cooperating with prosecutors and providing detailed information about the forgery operation. Mitchell's testimony revealed the technical sophistication of the fraud and helped investigators identify additional fraudulent pieces that had not been detected through mathematical analysis alone. His cooperation was essential in recovering artifacts and identifying victims who had unknowingly purchased forgeries. Several other associates of Peterson's network received sentences ranging from 10 to 18 years in federal prison. The coordinated prosecutions dismantled the entire criminal enterprise and sent a clear message to others involved in art fraud that sophisticated authentication methods could expose even the most carefully crafted deceptions. Elizabeth Thompson, now 86 years old, finally received the answers she had sought for 36 years about her husband's fate. The discovery of William's remains allowed for a proper burial that provided closure for family members who had lived with uncertainty for decades. Elizabeth attended every day of Peterson's trial, witnessing the conviction of the man responsible for destroying her family and ending her husband's promising career. The case prompted significant reforms in the art authentication industry. Major auction houses implemented new verification procedures that incorporated mathematical analysis and advanced scientific testing. Insurance companies revised their policies for covering high-value historical artifacts and required more stringent authentication before providing coverage. Museums established new protocols for evaluating acquisitions and reviewing existing collections for potential fraud. Wilson's contribution to solving the case was recognized through numerous professional honors and academic appointments. The retired horologist became a leading advocate for scientific approaches to art authentication and worked with federal authorities to train investigators in detecting sophisticated forgeries. His mathematical methods were incorporated into standard law enforcement procedures for investigating art fraud. The William Thompson case became a landmark in art crime investigation, demonstrating how advanced analytical techniques could solve decades-old cases and expose sophisticated criminal operations. The mathematical evidence that finally brought justice represented a revolution in forensic art authentication that would prevent similar frauds in the future. The resolution of Thompson's disappearance after 36 years provided justice for a dedicated scholar whose commitment to truth and accuracy had ultimately cost him his life. His research methodology, refined and expanded through Wilson's work, became his lasting legacy in the fight against art fraud and the protection of cultural heritage for future generations.